When Nathan Cole packed the last of his belongings into the silver-gray van, his neighbors were still in shock. A 70-year-old man who had lived his entire life in the suburbs of Boston now suddenly decided to move into an old wooden cabin deep in the Vermont woods. No relatives accompanied him, no farewells. Just a house sale agreement left on the table along with a short note, "Thank you for being quiet neighbors." Nathan had never been a loud man. A retired professor of psychology, he was always calm, courteous, but kept a certain distance from others. Perhaps the only thread that once tied him to life outside the classroom was his late wife Elaine, who passed away 5 years ago after a sudden stroke while tending the garden. Her death left a silent crack in him, not violent, not dramatic, just a fault line that never healed, making everything around him feel slightly blurred. His daughter Melissa lived in California, a sharp lawyer, always busy. Their lives had never truly intersected beyond a few video calls during Christmas. After her divorce last year, Melissa had offered to let him move in so he could spend time with his granddaughter. But Nathan quietly declined, not because he didn't love his daughter, but because he knew he no longer fit a household full of voices, lights, and tightly packed schedules. What he sought wasn't companionship nor care. He wanted emptiness, a silence deep enough to hear his own thoughts again, the ones he had lost after years of being a husband, a father, a professor, a responsible man. The house he bought was a small wooden cabin nestled into a pine-covered mountainside. No neighbors nearby, no cars, no phones ringing, no Wi-Fi. Just the wind scratching across the roof, the owl's call at night, and the crackle of fire every evening. When Nathan first stepped into the house, dusk was falling. The glass windows were dusty, the wooden floor groaned beneath his feet. But he wasn't afraid. He didn't turn back. There was something about the silence that felt right. As if he had returned to some buried part of himself, a part that had long been asleep. Old friends called to check in, a few even joked that he was exiling himself, but Nathan only smiled. "Not exile," he wrote in a handwritten letter to an old classmate. "I just need a place where nothing reminds me of what's been lost." Living alone in a wooden cabin in the woods during winter is no easy feat. Even Nathan wasn't sure if he could adapt. But he wasn't seeking comfort. He was seeking honesty with himself. Inside him now there was no anger, no sharp sorrow, only a vast space he didn't yet know how to fill. And he thought, maybe it doesn't need to be filled. Maybe it just needs to be sat with, observed, like someone relearning how to be with emptiness, not to escape it, but to understand it. And so he stayed. On the first morning, Nathan didn't turn on the lights. He stood silently by the window, watching the first streaks of sunlight slip through the trees. He heard the branches gently tapping the roof, the murmur of fire in the stove, and the rhythm of his own heartbeat. No one called him. No one needed him to answer anything. For the first time in years, he felt he could simply be still in the deepest sense of the word. In his first week in the forest, Nathan didn't set an alarm. He let his body adjust naturally to the light filtering through the curtain slats. Vermont's late autumn mornings were piercingly cold, making him curl tighter under thick wool blankets, reluctant to leave the warmth. But the quiet outside drew him out, not a suffocating silence, but one brimming with life. No lectures, no classes, no appointments. Yet Nathan still rose at the same hour each morning. He washed his face with cold water, put on a thick coat, and began a strange ritual, making a cup of tea and sitting silently gazing out at the woods. At first, he sat like that for only a few minutes, but day by day the stillness stretched 10 minutes, then 20. No books, no music, no specific task, just a space for his mind to slow down, as if his thoughts too needed time to breathe, to line up again after years of bracing against urban life. His first breakfast was a slice of toast with blueberry jam and a boiled egg. Simple but carefully prepared, as though he were cooking for a special guest. And over time, he became the most important guest of his own life. Each day he wrote a few lines in an old notebook. Not a diary like in his youth, just brief observations. Fog this morning. A deer crossed the back garden. Tea was weaker than yesterday. Things that might seem trivial but were his way of anchoring the present to avoid being swept away by memories or the hollowness. He gave himself a few soft rules. No breakfast after 8. No staying in pajamas past 9. Always change into a clean shirt after washing up, even if no one would see. These small rules weren't meant to please anyone, but to preserve a sense of order, like an old craftsman still polishing his shoes every day, though he no longer commuted to work. There were afternoons so cold the air pierced to the bone. Nathan would sit by the window doing nothing but watch the birds glide through the slate-gray forest. He didn't count the hours, but he could feel time passing with shape like a gentle stream flowing through his hands, no longer slipping away like it used to in the city, where day and night differed only by the color of the lights. Then something small happened. On the 11th day, while checking the firewood pile behind the cabin, his foot slipped on a thin sheet of ice coating the porch steps. The fall wasn't serious, but it left him lying in the snow for nearly half an hour, eyes fixed on the cold white sky, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't feel pain, he felt fear. Not fear of death, but fear of vanishing, of lying there all night and no one knowing, no one coming. After that, Nathan taped a small note to his mirror, checked the steps every morning. And he began waking up earlier, clearing ice from the porch, stretching his joints, rolling his wrists, checking his walking stick as if preparing for a great expedition, though his destination was only the wooden chair on the front porch. He learned something profound from that incident. No one supervises you in the woods, which is precisely why you must supervise yourself. From that day forward, every act, no matter how small, took on new meaning. Each was a declaration, I am still alive, a silent vow, I still care about myself. When you live alone, the first thing to slip is rhythm. And once rhythm breaks, today becomes indistinguishable from tomorrow. But if you can hold on to small markers, a cup of tea in the morning, a book after lunch, a lamp turned on precisely at 7 p.m., you've preserved the shape of time. And that, as Nathan came to understand, was a form of self-respect, quiet, unseen by anyone, but more powerful than any praise. Each morning after making tea and watching the forest, Nathan would step outside. Not to do anything grand, just to check the back door, gather some firewood, pick up fallen leaves, or walk once around the small clearing in front of the house. At first, his steps were tentative. A 70-year-old body doesn't move like it used to. His back would stiffen after cold nights, his knees sometimes clicked in odd little ways. But he didn't complain. He understood that movement was what kept him aware he was still alive. He remembered clearly the days after his wife's death. Nathan had spent hours sitting in the armchair, eyes open but not really seeing anything. Time drifted by like fog, without boundaries, without shape. Only the stillness was sharp. And he knew that if he kept living like that, his mind would go numb with it. Now in the woods, with no one to urge him on, he still gave himself a small mission to leave the house at least 3 times a day, even if only to the fence and back. Some days the snow fell thick. The wind sliced against his cheek, but he walked anyway. Not to train his body, but to keep it from forgetting how to move, to keep his joints from falling asleep in the silence. Then one morning in early November, as he went to fetch wood out back, he spotted a small creature curled near the base of a poplar tree. It was a red fox, fur matted, soaked and dusted with grime, its left hind leg seemingly injured. He didn't approach, just stood still for a while, then quietly turned and went back inside. The next day he left a bit of cured meat near where the fox had lain. It didn't touch it, but the day after the food was gone. And so a new ritual began. Every morning Nathan prepared a little food. Not too much, not too close. He always kept a distance. He never named the fox, never tried to tame it. It was simply a faint yet real relationship between a lonely old man and a wild creature also trying to survive. Gradually, Nathan started walking farther beyond the backyard to the edge of the woods along the path the fox had once rested on. Each time he felt like he was entering a larger rhythm, not just of his body, but of life continuing. Weeks later, when the sun shone weakly through the first snow, he saw the fox again, this time with 2 small kits trailing closely behind. They didn't come near, but they looked straight at him from a distance. Nathan stood still for a long while, arms hanging by his sides, heart beating as if someone had just called his name. That evening he wrote in his notebook, "Today I witnessed something beautiful. It didn't belong to me, but I was invited to stand beside it." From then on, he began taking walks every afternoon. No specific goal, no stopwatch, just to remind his body that it still mattered. Sometimes he'd stop by a tree place, his hand on the rough bark, and close his eyes. He listened not to the forest, but to his own breathing. That rhythm, he realized, was the only background music life still played as long as he kept moving. He also started doing a few stretches while boiling water, standing and sitting 10 times from his dining chair, just to keep his joints from rusting. Small acts like that, once deemed trivial, had now become sacred routines of safeguarding freedom. Because Nathan understood something deeply. As long as you can stand up on your own, you still own your life. At his age, movement was no longer about appearance or fitness. It was about preserving dignity. In a quiet house with no voices, calling each small motion, picking up a log, wiping down a table, stepping out onto the porch, became his way of telling the world, "I'm still here." Nathan had never imagined he'd handwrite a letter to a stranger in another state. He lived in an era where email had long replaced envelopes and messages arrived faster than a thought. But one late autumn afternoon, as he flipped through the final pages of a book on heirloom vegetables, his eyes paused on a small section seed exchange by mail, looking for gardening friends. Beneath it was the address of a woman named Claire from the state of Washington. He hesitated for several days, but one evening under the soft glow of a desk lamp he wrote, "Dear Mrs. Claire, I came across your post in the heritage seeds section. I have some old white bean seeds and a few Brandywine tomato seeds from my late wife's garden. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share." The letter went out like a bottle tossed into the sea. No expectations, no hope for a reply. 2 weeks later, he received a brown envelope with neat handwriting. "Dear Mr. Nathan, I was touched by your letter. White beans were a variety I once grew with my late husband. He passed away 8 years ago, but I still keep the habit of spring gardening. Thank you for sharing what remains of your wife's garden. I'm sending you some French carrot seeds in return, hoping they take root where you are." For reasons he couldn't explain, he read the letter 3 times. There was something in Claire's tone, gentle, not pitying, not overly familiar, that steadied him. From then on, they exchanged letters once a month. They didn't talk much about the past. Each letter was just a few lines about the weather, the crops, small daily habits. Claire wrote about a stray cat that often came to her door, and how she was learning to paint flowers with watercolors. Nathan wrote about a chair he'd just built, or how he made jam from the wild berries behind his cabin. No one asked too deeply. Yet between the lines, a strange kind of connection began to form. No obligation, no need for explanation. Just 2 people surviving in their own ways on opposite ends of the country. Once Claire sent him a black and white photo, her backyard garden with a small wooden table, a wicker basket, and a coat draped loosely over a chair. There were no people in the photo, but Nathan looked at it for a long time. It felt as if he'd just been invited to sit down on a gentle afternoon where nothing needed to be said to be understood. And then the letters became a kind of emotional anchor. On long winter nights when wind howled across the roof and snow piled on the porch, Nathan would often take out one of Claire's letters and reread it. There were lines he had memorized, but he still read them as a ritual against the void. Neither of them ever mentioned loneliness, but the careful, steady exchange of letters was proof they were not entirely alone. One January morning, Nathan sent Claire a photo of lunch he had made: homemade bread, an omelet, and a bit of carrot grown from her seeds. Beneath the photo he wrote, "Something has taken root not just in the soil but in the heart." The following week, Claire replied with a short letter and a small sheet of paper where she'd painted the meal in watercolor with a caption below, "I think this dish belongs on a kitchen wall." Nathan pinned the painting beside his tea shelf. Every time he boiled water, he looked at it and smiled. It didn't take much. A letter, a picture, a simple blessing was enough to remind a person that they were still part of someone's world. You don't need to sit at the same table to be close. You don't need to talk every day to care. True connection sometimes is someone choosing to regularly send you a small piece of their soul and trusting that you'll tend to it like a fragile sapling with quiet reverence. There was one thing the first few months in the mountains taught Nathan. Silence doesn't only come from the outside, it can grow inside you too. Even though he had built a steady routine, kept his body moving every day, and maintained written contact with Claire, there were still nights when the lights were out, the wind hissed across the roof, and shadows of branches danced on the wall when a quiet thought crept in. Do I still matter? What am I living for besides just existing? These questions didn't come with despair, just a chill that slowly seeped through his thoughts like night mist slipping between the cracks in the cabin wall. Not painful, but enough to make the heart shrink. Until one February morning, while sorting through old boxes in the shed, Nathan found a small, outdated voice recorder, the kind students once used to record his lectures over 20 years ago. It lay silent in a cardboard box beside stacks of course materials and old notebooks from his teaching days. He didn't remember what made him pick it up, but his hand flipped the switch on by instinct. Nothing happened. The battery was dead. but a vague thought sparked I could record something, not for others, for myself. That night he brought the recorder back inside, replaced the batteries, wiped off the dust, and then in a room lit only by the flicker of firewood, he pressed the red button. Episode 1 for Lily. Lily, his only granddaughter, was just 9 years old. She lived with her mother in California and had met Nathan only a few times during short holidays. He had never been close to her, but he thought someday when she's older, maybe she'll want to know how he lived, not his biography, his presence. He talked about the first time he met his wife, an outdoor movie screening his seat soaked with dew, and how she laughed until she cried when he accidentally tripped over her foot. He told the story of his first class where he stammered through the first 15 minutes from nerves, and a student raised her hand to ask, "Professor, are you speaking backward Italian?" He even spoke about the year he almost quit teaching when he was 42, convinced every lecture he gave was pointless, until a student wrote to say his words had helped her through a mid-20s breakdown. There was no clear goal, no structure, but he realized whenever he spoke, he came alive. Not as memories, but as a current, as if the past wasn't something gone, but something still pulsing inside if you dared call its name. Gradually, recording became a habit. Once a week, he'd dedicate an evening to a new episode, each one about 15 minutes long, sometimes just a small story like learning to drive in snow or skipping lunch for 3 days to buy his first nice fountain pen. He saved each recording to a USB drive, labeled them carefully. For Lily, listen when you're ready. No one knew he was doing it. No one needed to. But every time he pressed stop, he felt closer to himself than ever before. One evening after finishing a recording, he sat for a long time, the lamp casting his shadow against the wooden wall. He wasn't thinking of anyone else. Only a quiet truth came to him. I still have something to give, and that realizing he could still create something became a source of life. From then on, every morning, Nathan didn't just drink tea and watch the forest. He thought, what story will I tell tonight? And that question helped him rise from bed, straighten his back, prepare for the day. He no longer lived just to stay afloat. He lived to nurture something waiting to be born. And even if Lily never listened, never understood it, no longer mattered. Because the point wasn't whether someone else needed him, but that he chose to do something to keep loving life. It was a March night, colder than usual. Wind from the northern mountains surged down, dragging moisture through every crack in the cabin walls. Nathan was used to the harshness of the forest, but that night something felt off. His head was heavy, his heartbeat slowed as if his body were silently issuing a warning. He made ginger tea, stoked the fire higher than usual. The stove crackled, casting a warm light across the wooden walls, turning the cabin into a glowing cave. He pulled a chair close, opened his notebook to jot a few lines, but his eyelids fluttered shut. Then he heard a soft pop like someone yanking a power cord. The light went out. A faint burnt smell drifted from behind the stove. At first, Nathan thought the firewood had caught unevenly, but within a minute, smoke began rising from the floorboards, thick, black, and acrid, the smell of melting wire. He shot up, heart pounding. His hands trembled as he grabbed a flashlight dead battery. While fumbling in the dark, he heard a pop from the fuse box, and then flames flickered from the corner of the kitchen. The tiny cabin had become a smoldering trap. No one nearby, no cell signal, just him and a fire climbing up the curtain. In that moment, through burning eyes and dense smoke, a cruel thought flashed across his mind. I was wrong. I shouldn't have come here. Not because he feared death, but because of helplessness. The feeling of being left behind, utterly alone, with no one knowing, no one hearing. An old man in the forest at night, barehanded in a burning house. He finally got the back door open, dragging himself into the snow. The wind stung his face, freezing his cheeks. He turned to look. The fire had reached only the kitchen. The rest of the cabin was still intact. He knew what he had to do. With all the strength left, Nathan ran to the shed and grabbed the old fire extinguisher, the one he checked monthly, but never thought he'd need. And with practiced precision, he fought the fire, not rushed, but steady, step by step, like how he used to lecture: each step, each word, no panic. When the flames died completely, he collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Smoke still coiled around him. The kitchen was blackened, the doorframe scorched, but the rest remained. The next morning, he didn't write in his notebook, didn't make tea, didn't step outside. He sat for hours staring at the charred wall, as if searching for an answer. Not out of regret, but because he wasn't sure anymore if he'd made the right choice. By day's end, he wrote a short letter to Claire. The first line read, I think I may have been wrong in choosing this place. No detailed account, no fire description, just a confession honest, weary, without defense. Then he waited. No reply for a week. Then 2. Nathan began to think maybe Claire was too busy, or perhaps she didn't know what to say to a man who had lost faith in his own path. Then, on a Saturday morning at month's end, as he cleared the charred planks to repair the kitchen doorframe, a package appeared on the porch. No delivery person, just a postal stamp from Washington. Inside was a soft-cover handmade book stitched at the spine, the title handwritten, "The Things You Taught Me Without Knowing It." The first page bore a dedication from Claire. "I've compiled your letters, the ones about tea, the snow, the fox, the homemade meals. You thought you were just writing little things. But you gave me, and perhaps others, something no news article, social media post, or TED Talk ever could: real presence in everyday life." Each page was a passage from his letters. Below, Claire had added small notes, sometimes a thank you, sometimes brown ink illustrations, a sprig of carrot, a hand holding a teacup, a fox at rest. Nathan turned to the final page. Beneath a black and white photo were the words, "You thought you were alone, but you were planting seeds quietly in the hearts of others." He closed his eyes. No tears, just one long, full breath, as if his chest had opened after a long, mute winter. After the fire, Nathan didn't leave the cabin. On the contrary, he rebuilt the kitchen with his own aging hands. The burnt wood was replaced with warmer red panels. The old window frame was swapped for a wider one so he could see the forest better each morning. He didn't rush to fix everything. One task per week, one board, one coat of paint, one new shelf. The room slowly came back, not as it was, but as something closer to him, as if the place too had experienced a break and had chosen to go on. Not perfect, just present. Beside the tea shelf, he hung Claire's painting of his lunch. Below it, he pinned a board with a few photos, one of the mother fox standing in snow, a scrap of Claire's handwriting, and the first photo he'd received from his daughter in 2 years, Lily rehearsing the violin at school. He called it "The Wall of Those Not Here, But Who Live With Me Every Day." Claire later invited him to visit Washington. A sincere, gentle offer. But he declined. Not out of fear of travel nor rejection of affection, but because he believed some connections must stay at a certain distance, like 2 lanterns placed apart on a snowy field, not too close to blind, not too far to dim, just enough to see each other's glow. "I am here and you are there." Each holding a small light, he wrote in reply. Then, Nathan began a small, brave project. He converted his recordings into a podcast and uploaded them to an audio-sharing platform. Not to become famous, not to inspire, just to see whether what he recorded for Lily might reach someone else. The podcast was titled "Stories from the Forest." Each episode had a quiet theme. The old fountain pen, first day teaching breakfast by the fire. The letter that never came. He didn't promote it, didn't wait for responses. But after a few months, messages began arriving. From a single mother in Idaho who said his voice helped her through sleepless nights with a crying baby. From a depressed student in Minnesota who wrote that he made life feel like it could start again from the smallest things. Nathan didn't reply to all of them, but he read every word, saved each one. Every message was like ink touching paper, thin but real. And one day his daughter Melissa called. Her voice was tight. "Dad, I just listened to one of your podcasts. I didn't know you had so many stories to tell. I want Lily to hear them too. I think she needs to know her grandfather was someone who really lived." It was the first time they had spoken for over 10 minutes since Elaine's funeral. Not long after, Nathan received a letter from Lily, scrawled handwriting shaky and uneven. "Grandpa, I liked the carrot story. I planted a little carrot on my window. I named it Grandpa." Nathan smiled. Not a big smile, but one deep as a still autumn lake. That day he went outside and sat on the long wooden bench he had built facing the woods. The wind rustled gently through the trees. No voices, no chimes, but he felt surrounded by things no longer present in body, yet still vivid in connection. He drank his tea looking out at the distant pines. The sun quietly slipped behind the mountain like a velvet curtain drawing closed. And he whispered to himself, "I'm not lonely, I'm just living differently." No one heard him, but he didn't need anyone to, because he knew the only person who needed to hear it was himself. You're listening to a story from Light of Wise Elders, where quiet, meaningful journeys are brought to life. If today's story touched you, feel free to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to keep walking this path with us. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video.